friends, and welcome to the first chapter of the book of 1 Corinthians. So 1 Corinthians was written by Paul. Paul, if you've gone through the book of Acts, you know all about Paul. But Paul was an early church leader who, was blinded by God and radically transformed. And he went all around the Roman world starting churches. And so he started this church in the city of Corinth. So when you hear Corinthians, you're talking about, it's a letter to the people in Corinth, to the Corinthian people. So what is happening here is this letter we call it 1 Corinthians, but in reality, we know that Paul wrote letters back and forth to Corinth a few times. We don't know exactly how many times, but we know that it's at least 4. Because in this letter, he mentions his previous letter. And then in 2 Corinthians, he mentions another letter that we don't have. So we call it 1 Corinthians, but technically it's probably the second letter that Paul wrote to the Corinthian church. Now there was a purpose of this letter, and that is because the church in Corinth was totally messed up. And what a blessing that is to us. You know, if the Corinthian church wasn't so messed up, God wouldn't have had this opportunity to correct all of these things that's messed up about us and our churches today, or just our society today. You know, so there's these things. Corinth was a pretty rich place. It's what would be in modern day Greece, and it was kind of a port city, but it was also a city. It was kind of like Panama, where Panama is like a very narrow part that people used to just cross over it. And now, we made the canal because it was such a narrow part and you could save a lot of time by going through it. So Corinth was like that. And they would actually put beams down and they would roll their boats across the city of Corinth. And so there's a lot of money there. Another big deal is that the god of Corinth, different cities, they would kind of like adopt different Roman deities as their deities. And so Corinth was Aphrodite. She's like the goddess of sex. So that's Corinth. So the city of Corinth was sexually completely messed up. In fact, in the Roman world, if you would have gone anywhere in the Roman world and you call a woman a Corinthian woman, that was calling her a prostitute, essentially. So it was a pretty messed up place. But Paul spent a year and a half there, and he built a church, and it was a big church, and it was a strong church, and he loved it. But the church was pretty messed up. So this letter is not like other letters in the Bible. Other letters that Paul wrote, they were for all different kinds of reasons, but this letter was to correct the church in all the ways that they were messing up. So he starts the letter. And letters in the Roman world all started the same. You would put your name first. Not like in our letters today where we'd put our name at the end. You'd put your name first and who you were. And so he says, Paul, called to be an apostle. And Sosthenes, who is probably, Paul had bad eyesight, so Sosthenes was probably the person writing it down. They used to call them an amanuensis. So Sosthenes is probably his amanuensis, his scribe. Anyways, so he starts and says, I'm really sad that there's divisions among you. So the divisions were about this. So Paul started the church, and then he sent other people. And some of the leaders were very, very good speakers. And Apollos is the one that he was just very charismatic in his speech. He really knew how to deliver a message. But Peter, it mentions Cephas there. That's Peter. That's just the Roman way of saying Peter. And so some people are saying, I follow Paul, I follow Apollos, I follow Peter. And Paul is essentially saying here, you guys don't follow us at all. Follow Jesus. You need to make sure that this is not a party thing. He's saying here, is Christ divided? No. And he doesn't say no, but that's the implication here. He's saying, don't follow any of us. So that's the first part there. And then he goes on to say something that I just want to say that I love this chapter. It's such a good chapter because it talks about this concept that I just love. And that is that Christianity, all the glory goes to God, because if you if you look at it, it's not a power religion. It's not a religion that's based on eloquence. It's not a religion that's based on political influence. It's in a lot of ways a religion that's based on what appears to be weakness. I was watching a series a while ago called Vikings, and I don't recommend it. But the Vikings, they, for the first time, went over to England, and they were blown away by all the wealth that the English had. And they break into a church and they steal all the dishes and everything that are in the church. And there's a lot of gold and a lot of ornaments and everything. And they see a crucifix on the wall, and they're all kind of in awe, and they say, oh my gosh, is this their God? He's dead. And they were just so confused. And then later on they met some people, and they were showing all of these different saints, and a lot of them were showing different things that they overcame. And somebody was able to overcome being shot at with a bunch of arrows. And so the Vikings came and they shot the guy with a bunch of arrows. And the Vikings were, I only watched the first couple of episodes. It got a little messed up, but they were hell-bent on eradicating Christianity everywhere. And they just didn't understand how something so weak, how someone could be worshiping a dead God. And yet, how many Vikings do you know today? And how many Christians do you know today? Pretty soon after this show, the Vikings all end up, I don't know what happens in the show. I'm sure that whatever Hollywood was doing, they didn't do what was accurate. But Christianity took over that whole world. Vikings were gone. Christianity wins. And so there's a part in this chapter where it says, I preach Christ crucified. And it's a stumbling block to the Jews, and it's foolish to the Gentiles. And really nobody quite knows what to do with it. And so, and he even talks about the people, like Christians, when we speak, we don't speak with eloquence. Now, I was looking at these two sections, and I was trying to figure out, okay, when does he stop talking about one thing and start talking about another? Because he's talking about the divisions, and then he stops and he starts talking about how, and I love this word, he said, the weakness of God is greater than the strength of man, and the foolishness of God is greater than the wisdom of man. I feel like God's constantly doing that. He's constantly using what seems to be foolishness. If you're a Christian now, I'm sure that a lot of highly educated people would look at you and say, that's foolishness. But that's the truth. And that's the truth that's going to save your soul. It's so amazing to me. And it's so wonderful. However, I'm looking at the transition between him talking about, I follow Paul and I follow Apollos. And the first couple times I read it, I just kept on missing it. Like, when does this transition happen? And then I found it, and it says, he's talking about baptism. He's like, I didn't baptize any of you. And it's kind of funny. He's like, except for this person. Oh yeah, and then these people. And then that person. So he's like, kind of stumbling over. He's like, I didn't baptize any of you, but his point is like, you guys aren't following me because I baptized you. It's like, I'm not your pastor. And he's like, and I didn't speak, and this is my favorite part here. He's like, I didn't speak through eloquent words, lest the power of the gospel be robbed of its power. I'm paraphrasing poorly, probably, but if someone's going around and making Christianity, big because of their eloquence, it's robbing Christ of its power. And he's like, that's not what I'm doing. God chooses to use the weak things of this world to kind of make fools of the wisdom and the strong of this world. So God is so amazing, and he, like I've said before, he wants us to have faith in him alone. If your faith is based on a person or some charismatic thing, if it's based on anything other than God, then it's not a relationship with God. It's a relationship with that thing that you think is great. So there can be none of that. So that's the first chapter of 1 Corinthians. I hope you follow me through this book. It's a wonderful, wonderful book. All right. Have a great day. Bye.